2 years ago today, I made 5 cheap JDM cars and it was a very successful video, but since then there's been COVID, Ukraine war and cost of living crisis, not to mention cars cost more in general over the last few years. And do some of these cars now cost as much as a McLaren F1? Well, in this video, here are 5 cars that are up to date, are cheap JDM cars, and unfortunately they won't be Supras, Chasers or RX-7s, but I can promise you I've got some really good cars in this that you're going to like. Hope you enjoy this one. To absolutely confirm, yes, I am doing JDM, proper JDM from Japan, not cars that have been sold in the UK as Japanese cars for the UK or USA, etc. This really will be import cars. The first car on this list is the third generation Toyota Soarer, a car that I've actually kind of gotten used to more recently. Yes, it has funny looks and it doesn't quite live up to its expectations of its older brother being the Supra A80 at the time. But the third generation is a really proper JDM import car that you can get for a good price. Here I found one for $5,995. Now yes, it might be the cheaper model side of things, but it's still a good bargain. And if you wanted to get a good one, you might be looking at about £8,000. Given the JDM market today, that seems almost reasonable. And the Soarer is super rare. It's a car I believe just always got underrated. This came from the 1991 to the 2000 model. And while it was never really great because it lived in its expectations of competitors, it was still a really cool and luxury coupe it was designed for at the time. It was from Lexus's division flagship, a sedan, in 1989, and it was commissioned as a Toyota in California. And then in mid-1991, the vehicle was designed by the studio that debuted the Lexus SC300-400. And of course, there was a lot of player Lexus and Toyota at the time, and today still is. This engine was actually very underrated given the fact it had a 2.5 litre 1JZ turbocharged engine, and it was also a 3 litre and 4 litre. It was never really selling that well in the US, but it obviously did for some people because they really liked this JDM car. As a result, it kind of got a lot cheaper and people were able to pick this up and modify it. A car that people really didn't consider at the time in the 90s to do so. The car you really don't see much of, and admittedly you probably won't see it in the UK much, but the one example I did find, and along with a few other examples, were pretty good nick, and again a car you just don't see compared to seeing its Supra A80 competitor, which would have sold a lot more. The second car is the Nissan Stagea from 1996 to 2007, and it was produced by Nissan as a station wagon. It was originally produced in 1996 as a direct competition for the Subaru Legacy, and it's probably a reason why we didn't get this car. We had Honda Accord Estates Aero decks, as well as the Subaru Legacy. What was really special about the Stagea is that essentially it was a Skyline underneath. It had all the similar components that you would expect from a Skyline, just not branded as that, and obviously nowhere near as fast. The Stagea shares many mechanical parts with the Skyline and Nissan Laurel as well, so 2 cars that were pretty cool in the JDM scene. Admittedly with this one, unlike the Soarer, this one seems to be a bit more popular. You could either go for the first generation, which had a 2 litre RB25 or 20, and the second generation, which in my opinion is not as good looking and nowhere near as JDM enough. Obviously at this price point you'll want to go for a more stock option because I could only find them around 10 grand minimum, but given the fact a Skyline these days is well up to 50k for some of them or more, you're probably going to get a pretty good bargain out of this, and you could modify it to be completely unique. What I love about the Stagea is it is pretty much a base canvas to do anything with it, and you have a Skyline underneath if you were to go about the right parts and modifications. It's a car that again I really like, and if you have a family, it's perfect for the JDM enthusiast. And the Nissan Skyline family tree, an extremely long list of great cars, but the 11th generation is the one I want to focus on here. The Skyline was introduced in 2001, and yes, while it doesn't look like your average Skyline, it technically was still called the Skyline. It used a front midship engine known as the VQ35DE, and it had a rear-wheel drive layout, so pretty good so far. This was also branded as the Infiniti G35, so if you wanted to look for those, then you could also do that. And yes, another import car that wasn't sold in the UK, so that makes it proper JDM. This was actually sold under the company's luxury brand as well, so that's why it became an Infiniti, which is kind of strange, but you can get it as a Skyline as well. It had production runs from 2001 to 2006 and the coupe from 2002 to 2007, so you might have still seen some at shows or just out and about, but they are, generally speaking, pretty rare. I call this one, and most other people do, the 350 GT, and the one you want to go for here is probably the coupe, given it does look cooler. I definitely wouldn't say no to owning one of these. It's pretty cool. The engine is a 2.5 litre V6, or can also go up to a 3.5 litre V6. Of course, this car has similar elements to this car than the Skyline, and Japanese Skyline orders reached around 4,200 units for this car, which in theory you could say didn't sell that well, and that was domestically. Some of them went to America, a lot of them were out there, but the V35 broke the previous Skyline tradition, being the first generation to offer no straight six engine, no turbocharger, and no GTR version. So the decision that was extended to all Skylines, and very odd for this one. Probably why then it is very cheap on this list, and I found one for a very reasonable £6,000, and some of them less, some of them more, which is kind of crazy. It is a very odd car out of the family litter of great cars that Nissan made for the Skyline, but the 11th generation V35 is the one you want to go for if you are looking for something unique, still says Skyline, and is official JDM. Of course, the next car needs no introduction. It is, of course, the Mazda MX-5 Mark 1 specifically. Now, yes, you can buy a Mazda MX-5 in the UK very easily, and there's so many of them. But I've specifically gone for a bit of a cheap one here. It's the Eunos Roadster, and the Eunos Roadster being the car that was imported from Japan, and it was only made for the Japanese market. Some made their way over to the UK, and a fair few actually, in the 1990s, so this meant there's been time for them to come over to the UK, get cheap, and still remain cheap, even though Mark 1s technically are going up. But when you consider it to the Silvias and the Skylines, of course, they're not that expensive. The V-Spec Eunos, which is known as, is very cool, and it looks a bit different in that it's kind of a pretty good looker. It's got a lot of cool specs on it, and of course, if you don't know already, the MX-5 is a huge hit in the UK and across the world, being the best-selling sports car. The production of it, of course, sold 431,000 from 1989 to 1997 for the Mark 1 only, and it was extremely successful. Of course, you already know the stats on this. It's 1,500cc and a lot of fun, and of course, rust is an issue if you do consider one, but you can drift it and you can mod it, and that's the main thing. Finally, we have the most JDM car of them all, given that it was only sold in Japan. It is the Suzuki Cappuccino. It's a two-doors, two-seater detachable hardtop sports car produced by Suzuki, and this is known as a K car. Specifications for lower tax and insurance in Japan, which makes it a lot easier to get around, and a lot of people just bought them because they were cars that were really popular. Some kind of made it more JDM status, and some actually, like the Cappuccino, created this cool era of K cars that people wanted to own and import them to the UK and vice versa beyond. Well, the K car in question is the Cappuccino, and it's an excellent car from 1991 to 1998, and extremely attainable for the UK market as they're pretty cheap to both import or buy if one was already over here. It has a 3-cylinder 657cc DOHC engine, and this means it's extremely light but kind of peppy, but obviously not a lot of power given that it's only a small car. It's a 50-50 weight distribution, and it's a pretty cool little cute car. Kind of reminds me of the Daihatsu Copen as well, if you've seen that one, or the Honda S660, which are also little K cars, are more cooler in terms of a JDM perspective. If you are wanting one of these JDM cars, then they are going to set you back at anywhere from £6,000 to £8,000 roughly. Now, this isn't too bad considering that, again, JDM cars are supposed to be more expensive for the ones that we know and love. And if you want something that's pretty cool, easy to modify, and really cheap to insure and tax, this is your best bet, because I would definitely have this one. Don't forget to subscribe if you like car content.